Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be doing another one of my favourite series to film, and it's my crime documentary reviews. This is episode 3 actually, so I'm not gonna lie, I'm surprised I remembered to get it this far. Before we get into the video, I'm going to address the change. I did have a moment and I cut all my hair off because I got really hot here and I just couldn't handle it anymore, so I cut my hair off and I like it. I think it's cute, so I don't really want anyone else's opinion on that, okay? Unless it's nice. If it's nice, please feel free to pop something in the comments below. If it's not, Anyway, it's also extra frizzy right now because, what are my neighbours doing? Something dodgy probably. It's extra frizzy right now because I'm swimming a lot and the chlorine is absolutely ruining it. So for the next like month or two's worth of videos, if you see me looking like a steak, just keep it to yourself, okay? We'll get there. Just let it grow in, okay? Okay, cool. Back to the task at hand. I am going to be talking about 5 documentaries and docuseries that I have watched this time. All of these are from Netflix, so haven't watched any on there in a really long time. I had a very big list to get through, so I kind of picked 5 that just seemed the most appealing and 2 that were actual documentaries rather than docu-series, so I could watch them all in one go without having to be like, oh, what episode am I up to? When am I going to come back to this? Etc, etc. I'm just going to dive right in because I'm actually really excited to talk about them. Like usual, I'm reading this off of my phone, which is sitting just here off the screen. I was going to say to the left of you, but it's kind of to the left of you. I don't know what way it'll be when you watch this. I'm stalling. The first one is called Eileen, Queen of the Serial Killers, and it was an hour 45 documentary, so all in one go. It was the first one I watched and I think it was pretty good. I have heard this story of Eileen Wuornos before. I definitely just butchered her last name. But I've heard her story on channels like Bailey Sarian, I believe the Morbid podcast might have covered her, and people like Danielle also have made videos on her, so she is everywhere. She's pretty prolific because she is a female serial killer, and I was a little bit on how this documentary was going to go, but I think it wasn't too bad. That being said, I have a bit of like mixed reviews and thoughts on it, so I'm just going to grab my phone and have it next to me because that's a really long way away and my eyes can't see that far anymore. My first point was that everyone interviewed or doing the interviewing, just everyone in this documentary, thought they were a celebrity. They thought they were hot shit. Like, you could tell that everybody who was in this documentary thought they were so important because, you know, I'm getting asked questions and I'm doing this job and it's a female serial killer and it's so high profile, like, and it did just kind of taint it a little bit for me. Like, yeah, you're here and you're talking about it and it is good to hear your side and what you have to say, but everything came with this air of like, oh, I'm so much better than you, you know? It was kind of icky, I'm not gonna lie. It showed a lot of footage from what I can assume is the movie that was made about her. Now, they didn't specifically state anywhere that I saw that that's what that footage was from, but it seemed like it was. They talked a bit about it, and I feel like if it was, it's a little bit weird to be using that because they talked about how like the police commissioners and people who were working the cases sold their stories to like directors while the case was still ongoing in order to make this movie, and they actually all ended up losing their jobs for it. And then I'm like, but I'm pretty sure the footage that you're describing is the footage that you're showing. Not sure on that one. It was a little bit confusing, but it kind of just sat weird. Like, maybe, I don't know. I don't know how else they would have gotten like the footage and the scenes that they'd shown. Like, either it was like they went all out for a recreation. Ow, why did you bite me? Welcome to my house. But yeah, I don't know if it was like they had a big budget for recreation or whether they did just use clips from the movie, because I don't understand how else they would have gotten them, and it felt weird because they were actively talking about this movie that shouldn't have been made and was like breaking laws and stuff, and then I'm pretty sure they used the footage from it. It just felt really weird. I don't know. I need clarification on that one though. In terms of like the victims of this case, I think there were 2. that the documentary covered like relatively in depth, especially the first one, because obviously, you know, that is what started everything. So they did talk about him really in depth, and because some other things happened a little bit later in the case that kind of made it pivotal to talk about that one victim. But as for like, I think there was 7 in total. They mentioned the first one a lot, the second one briefly. Other than that, they kind of just glossed over everybody else. Like, I genuinely could not tell you any of their names. There was a lot going on and a lot that was talked about in terms of the first victim, but for everybody else it was kind of just like, oh yeah, and she did that. And that just didn't feel very fair to the victims for me. Like, I know the documentary is about Eileen, but I feel like if you're going to be talking about what she did to people, you should at least acknowledge the loss that was that person's life, you know? I felt like I just didn't get that. In terms of timeline, it jumped back and forth a little bit. I know what they were trying to do, like it was like foreshadowing in the beginning, and then as you ran up to that timeline, it kind of circled back to what you saw in the beginning. So I totally understand what they were trying to do with that. I'm just not sure that it 100%... Hello? Hi! Come on up here. Come on. There you are. Hi! Sorry for all the interruptions, it just appears to be that kind of day in this household. I was trying to say that it's obvious what they were trying to do with that like foreshadowing and kind of creating like a full circle by the end of the documentary, you know, like it all linked into each other, but the way that it was done, for me at least, was a little bit confusing. I kind of had to be like it sort of turned more into, why am I seeing this? I've already seen this. Or when it was opening, it was like, this is a really weird place to start the documentary. What's going on here? But I know what they were trying to do. I did get that, so it obviously did work. It just was a little bit confusing. I feel like if you weren't sitting, watching, paying perfect attention to it, you might be like, And the last one I do just want to point out, nothing to do with the documentary itself, but it did point out, and I think it's really important, that even though she did obviously do these things, she has admitted to it, she was punished for it, yada yada yada, there's no contesting that, she was not given a fair trial, and I had no knowledge of that specifically before watching this documentary. I feel like they covered the trial and what happened during and post really well. There was a whole lot of information there that I had never heard before, so for that purpose of it, I think you should watch this documentary. Like I said, there are some other things that I had issues with, but for that purpose, I learned so much about how she was treated and how everything went down, and it just really wasn't fair. I think everyone obviously has the right to a fair trial, and Eileen was not granted that. It was absolutely crazy watching how everything unfolded. And it just, that is the pivotal point. That's the best part of this documentary for me. If it didn't have that information, it would have been like I probably would have stopped halfway through, but they did have that and they covered that really well. So for that purpose, go watch this if you're interested in that stuff. Moving on to the next one. This one is a 3-episode docu-series and it is called American Murder, Gabby Petito. Now, I feel like anyone who has been online in the last few years has heard of this case, knows of this case, but this was my first time actually watching anything or delving into it in depth. I obviously did watch it unfold. I was in New Zealand at the time, so you know, we get kind of the dribs and drabs of this sort of information. It wasn't as high profile as it was in the States when it was happening, but I did follow along briefly. This docuseries though has so much information in it. This one, like, the story is so horrifically sad, but it needed to be told, and I think this documentary did it really well. So some of the things that they did well was their timelines were laid out so clearly. There was no jumping back and forth. It was all very clear, very streamlined, very easy to follow. Also, they did use cliffhangers at the end of every episode, because like I said, it was a docu-series, so 3 episodes. They always end them on some sort of cliffhanger. It's just how they hook you into watching another one. But for this docu-series especially, they were done so well, like just very... what's the word that I'm looking for? Like, the episodes and what they're talking about are so intense that it builds and builds and builds and builds to this cliffhanger, but every single like cliffhanger or what's coming next was done with so much respect. Like, it wasn't gimmicky, it wasn't like a soap opera or super overhyped, over dramatic. It was done very respectfully in every sense that these things can be done when you're making a TV show and you have to have a cliffhanger. I just thought it was really well done on their part, the way that they kind of handled all of the information and getting it across to the viewer. I don't have many notes as such about the documentary per se, like how it was done and put together, because it was just very, very good. I enjoyed every minute of it. If you can say that you enjoy these sorts of things, it was very informative, very well done, and they had so many people, and the perfect people that mattered. Like, there was no one there who didn't need to be there, which sometimes in documentaries and docuseries you get that. You get people that just want to be involved and they paint themselves to be a little bit more important in the story than they actually are. This one did not have that. Every single person that was in here needed to be in here, and they said things that every single time painted something differently or gave you information that you really needed to understand the story and what's happening and who Gabby was as a person. That leads me into my next point, which was, from what I could tell, Gabby didn't have like a huge network of people in her life, especially around the time that she passed, but she had people that loved her so incredibly deeply, and it's just so very, very obvious about the way that they spoke about her in that documentary, the way that she was described and everybody's relationships and how she was remembered, even just the briefest interactions. It very much painted Gabby as just this amazing person that people loved so much, and I think that's why they do things like these docuseries, because obviously her parents and stuff and her family are in these, and it's so incredibly painful for them to have to relive all of this, but they love her so deeply that they want to make it worth it and make it known, you know, and I really respect that. Her parents actually supported the passing of a bill to be used by law enforcement when assessing domestic violence victims, whether they're in immediate danger. So like in her case, they were pulled over and people were asking questions about like, are you safe? Are you okay? And it wasn't, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinion, wasn't handled the way that it should have been. So her family supported the passing of this bill. So now I believe that there's like 11 questions that police officers are trained to ask people when they attend domestic violence things, and it's how they assessed what's actually going on, whether people are safe, whether they're in immediate danger, and I think that's absolutely beautiful, that it's one of those things where the parents have used their experience, this horrific experience, to do some good going forward for everybody else in the community, in the state that they're in. The last thing I want to say before I stop talking about this one is that family, his family, I'm not even going to say their name because, ew, but they are dirty. So dirty. I think you guys should watch this because just for nothing else, you need to understand what actually went on with like Brian and his parents and all of that kind of stuff. I just think immediately you get like a bad vibe when they start talking about it, and the more that they go into, you're like, yeah, firstly, ooh, secondly, ooh, thirdly, that mother. I have concerns. I have great concerns, and that's where I'm gonna leave that. Okay, the next one on my list was called Fred and Rose West, a British horror story. Now this one also was a docuseries, 3 episodes as they usually are, and I actually thought this was a different case. So I was very surprised when things started happening and they started talking about everything in this case and interviewing people, because I was sitting there going, I don't remember that happening. No, turns out completely different story. I was just wrong. So this docuseries was my first time hearing the term appropriate adult, and I actually had to stop and Google it because they use it so frequently that I was like, what the heck does this mean? But I Googled it, and for those of you who also don't know like me, oh no, I woke up my Google. Anyway, I Googled it, and for those of you who don't know, like me, it basically means like a person outside of like the police who make sure that the person in custody is getting like their rights met and they're being treated fairly. So like sort of like a social worker or something like that, but you know, just someone who's not in law enforcement or their lawyer or something, someone who's like completely separate from the situation, and their job is literally just to make sure that the person in custody is being treated fairly throughout all of this. So now we learned. This docu-series is one of the best ones that I have ever watched in terms of people featured in it. Like I talked about earlier, this one also had every single person there like needed to be there to discuss a different point, and they had so many people that it was just mind-blowing, because a new one would pop up and a new one would pop up, and you'd be like, how many people exactly are involved in this story? But they had everyone from well, first of all, they had tapes of Fred and Rose like speaking, and I love when docuseries or documentaries have that, because it's literally that first person experience. You can see exactly how it went down. This had that, and then it also had all of the lawyers from like both sides, I believe, the press, the police, the victims, their families. There was an escaped victim. There was even one of their children, like Fred and Rose's children was in it. Like, it just, every single person was like a new perspective. There he goes. Hello. But yeah, every single person who was in this documentary needed to be in here. This is probably one of the first ones I've watched that has featured like the press as well and their perspective, which was really, really cool to see. I think even just that on its own would have been a really cool docuseries to make, just from the press's point of view. But it was just really cool to have them featured alongside everybody else that you would typically see in a documentary. This is one of those ones where it's a really good example of like how people approach their victims and choose people based off like a profile. And something I'm going to talk about a lot in like the next couple of documentaries is the term less dead. And it's when people pick people that they assume are going to be less dead, which means they won't be missed by anybody. So it's people like back in the day, obviously, there were a lot of hitchhikers would have been considered this, people who were homeless, people who are estranged from their families, a lot of sex workers, things like that. So not all of, but a lot of the people who were victims in this, they're all young women, they're all essentially considered less dead because they're either, you know, in a circumstance where they are not in touch with their family, or maybe they were hitchhiking, or just in some sort of vulnerable position where obviously Fred and Rose saw these people and considered, yep, that's the one, they meet the criteria, nobody's going to miss them. And it was just really, really nice to see a documentary where there were people, like family members even, but just the police as well, that cared about these people. And it didn't matter what their position was in life, it didn't matter how old they were, it didn't matter, you know, their monetary status or schooling or anything like that, because all of these victims were like young women. But every single one of them was cared for so deeply, and it kind of really was just nice to see, because you hear the term less dead a lot when you're dealing with true crime, and it's so sad to think about people like that. And it was just really refreshing to be shown that these people, even though they might have been estranged or missing or having some time on their own, that they were still loved, you know? And I just want to finish talking about this one by saying that as much as Fred and Rose were both equal partnerships in this, which is absolutely astounding to me, Fred was a disgusting human being, and Rose was not much better, but she also never really had the chance, because they pointed out in the documentary that when they met, Rose was 15 years old and Fred was 27. So he was a grown-ass man and she was a child. And he literally, from what you get in the documentary, it shows that he groomed her until the day she was 16, and then immediately, he said a month into being 16, he had her pregnant. So he literally just waited for that little tiny border to click over for them to be able to cross that line. He groomed her for however long beforehand, and then immediately she was his wife and popping out his babies. So if we're going to talk a little bit about the nature versus nurture side of things, which also comes up a lot in true crime and really, really fascinates me, I feel like obviously Rose had been nurtured in a way that, you know, wasn't the best, and she probably did already have a lot of these tendencies, but then she also met Fred, and Fred just left her with absolutely no chance to be a normal human being. So careful who you hang around, I guess. I have two more to talk about, and I left these two till last because they are very, very good, and I think you should watch both of these. Actually, all of these are pretty good watches, but these two would have to be my favorite two from this set. So this one is called Gone Girls, the Long Island Serial Killer. It is a 3-episode docuseries, and this is a must watch. This one it didn't quite have me in tears, but I was pretty damn close, and that's saying something. It's so heart-wrenching. It's so deep. It's just, if you're gonna watch it, bring a tissue. That's all I'm saying. So this case is very, very complex, but it's one of those things that there's so much involved that makes it more important for it to be heard by as many people as possible, because there are still people or bodies and victims that have not been identified. And I just think the more people that see things like this docuseries, that hear people talk about it, the more likely we are to be able to find some sort of connection, whether it's through DNA or someone coming forward to help identify people like this. And it's not just for this case, that goes for everybody. Obviously you can have like your DNA put into databases nowadays, which is amazing. We should talk about that in another video. I don't know enough about it, but I think it's fantastic. Anyway, because there is so much involved and so much to try and keep track of, they had to lay this out really well, and I think they did it perfectly. They literally used maps of different areas, they color coded, they pinpointed, they did the string lines to show every single thing for every single person, and whoever did all of the developing for that in the background, mad props to you, because that could have gotten really confusing really quickly, but it was done, in my opinion, perfectly. I was not confused in any sense of the word. Everything was laid out in black and white, and you can just, as they're speaking, everything pops up, everything shows, and it's no confusion. You can really focus on what is actually going on and what is being spoken about. You're not sitting there going, wait, what did I miss? Wait, who's this? Wait, what? Like, none of that. Perfect. What I also really liked about this is obviously they contacted all of the families of the victims to be in this docuseries, and a lot of them were there, and it's so important to feature these people, to talk about their loved ones, because again, this is another one of those cases where these girls that were taken, and boys, could be and were considered less dead because they were sex workers. A lot of them were, or dancers, or, you know, like escorts, things like that. There's a mixture of girls here, and every single one of them was so, so loved. I have never seen a bunch of families and a bunch of people band together so securely to get shit done for their loved ones. Like, it is actually awe-inspiring what these families did, especially the initial like 5 women that are featured, because their girls were the first found and the first missing. They are just some of the strongest people that I think I have ever seen on this planet, and it's just so wild to me that they are what drove the force behind this. They are the ones that kept everything going across all these years. They never backed down, they never stopped talking, they never stopped searching, and they never stopped supporting each other. And it's just, there was also in this documentary barely 5 minutes where a family member was not on the screen. And I think that's really important, because I've talked about it in my past videos where sometimes we get a little bit caught up on the murderer and we don't talk about the victims quite enough. And this one just absolutely nailed it. I do genuinely mean it. There's barely 5 minutes of screen time without a family member of a victim or a friend of a victim coming up and talking about how important they were, or what they saw, what they experienced. People who were there at the time and met this person and tried to fight. All of them were there, and they were really the central focus of the whole documentary, and it was just so good, so well done. I will just say, in terms of the case itself, it's very, very sad that the girl who went missing, which prompted the start of the whole investigation, she was found, but they ruled her death an accident, which is absolutely ridiculous, and literally nobody agrees with it. I think they had a second coroner do an inquest, and even he was like, but the police never ever changed the ruling on her death, and unfortunately her mother did end up passing away. So even though she helped uncover all of these bodies and solve so many solve murders, put murderers away is what I was trying to say. She was basically the driving force behind the start of the entire investigation, and she never ever got to see justice for her daughter. So that's extremely sad. So just be ready for that if you do watch this one. That was kind of the point that made me quite upset, because she worked so hard and she supported everybody else, and she was just this absolute Wonder Woman when it came to holding everybody together and speaking out and saying her truth and getting justice for her daughter. And it's just really sad that she never really got it. We can all assume that this guy did it, because let's be real, he's a piece of shit and he probably did, but yeah, it just really sucks. And the last thing for this one, at the very end, they kind of had like, you know how they do a summary of these things and they put like text on the screen, and they just said like the police department, which by the way, who it was initially handled under was absolutely corrupt as fuck, and these people literally went to prison. But of course, the people who did the docuseries reached out to the police department and they declined to comment, because of course they did. All of them declined to comment, and honestly, I would just once really like someone from the party who did wrong, the party who fucked up, to just put their hand up and say, hey, I fucked up. I'm really sorry. Maybe the investigation wasn't handled the way it should have been, but you know, we got there in the end. Very sorry it happened. It shouldn't have taken that long. But no, because nobody can admit to their wrongs. And before I get too heated on that topic, we're going to go on to our last one, and it is called Capturing the Killer Nurse. It is about an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes documentary. And this one, again, I thought it was a case that I knew. Turned out it's a completely different person. So don't know how many murdering nurses there are around, but apparently it's more than I thought it was. I will say before I talk about this one, if you've got any sort of like medical induced or surrounding anxieties, hospital anxieties, healthcare anxieties, maybe don't listen to this portion of the video, maybe don't watch this. However, if you don't and you think you can handle it, this is a very good documentary and I recommend it. So the opening of this documentary is just absolutely haunting by itself. When it opens, there's a voice singing "You Are My Sunshine" in this like really slow melody in what I believe is like a minor key, so it's like keyed down, and it just feels really off to be hearing it that way. And you know that when a documentary or when a movie or something starts and it just hits you like that, you know it's going to be good. And it was. It 100% lived up to it. They kind of circled back to this in the middle, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but it was just a really good way. Whoever made that choice to start the documentary like that, A+. They interviewed quite a lot of people for this one as well, and I think they all were really good. There was 2 of his really close co-workers from his last hospital that he was in. One of them featured throughout the entire thing, and the other one featured quite a bit in the beginning but sort of like trailed off. I don't think she had much to do with him or the investigation after he was fired, which honestly, fair enough, don't blame you. But the one who did end up helping out and stepping up, I just have to say, like, I commend her so highly, because that must have been not only absolutely terrifying, but like, that was one of your best friends in the entire world. Like, she would have been heartbroken, and she still pushed through and did everything that she could to make sure that the family saw justice. Because what he did was, I won't spoil it too much, but he basically poisoned people until they died in various ways. And one of them, or a couple of them, were patients that were actually healthy. They were getting better, they were going home. And people that the staff had really warmed to. There was someone who was interviewed discussed that a person who she had really warmed to, one of her patients who was very special, she thinks that they got too close and that's why he killed him, which is just absolutely horrific. He is the person who brought the "You Are My Sunshine" into the documentary, because as he was coming out of like a coma state, essentially a coma state, he would sing that to the nurse. And it just, like, that revelation when you got to that point in the documentary was like, oh my god, that's why they started it like that. I wish they had played that audio again a little bit in the background just to make it like a tiny bit more haunting, but maybe that's a bit too dramatic for a real life story. I don't know, that's just my thought. The interview settings for everybody were really cool, because obviously this is like a hospital based thing, so they could have just done like sterile, white, bland, medical setting, but they didn't. They had like, they did have a couple that were like that, but they had like, it was toned down. It wasn't like, I'm sitting in a room in a hospital. It was more like, this could be an office in a hospital, or a personalized office in a police building or something like that. And a couple of them were even at this like bar that just felt really warm and relaxed, and like you were talking to someone who wanted to really be in your presence and tell you the truth. And they obviously schedule all of them in a certain way, so they hit you and they really make you feel that way. I'm just saying it was done purposefully, and it was done pretty damn well. Going back to the co-worker that I mentioned that ended up working with the police, I do just have to give her more props, because it's very obvious that she still feels not only a bit of like survivor's guilt in a way, but just a lot of guilt for how everything went down, I think, because both of the nurses that worked closely with him that were interviewed talked very openly about how much they loved him, how much they adored him. He was a great guy, you know, the guy that they knew. They didn't know this other side of him, and when it all came out, it was a huge shock, and they couldn't believe that it was happening. They couldn't believe that they had been hoodwinked, essentially, by this person that they thought they knew everything about. But then also when they realised how he was doing it, it also made her feel responsible, and she talked about that, like unknowingly helping him do these things when there's absolutely no way in the world that they could have suspected that that's what was going on. So that's quite sad to watch, was her not have the realization, because you can tell that she's felt that way for a very long time, but her just being open enough to talk about it in a documentary and say, you know, I feel guilty because in a way I was helping him. That's just absolutely huge for her to be able to come out and say, and I don't think she should feel that way at all, but I suppose it's probably lovely for the families to see such remorse coming from someone that was involved that is genuine, because the guy who did this, yeah, he was all, oh, woe is me, oh, I'm so bad, this was so bad of me, I'm a sick human individual, I can't do this anymore, I should be hospitalized. But it's also performative. You're like, you don't care. And everybody got up in court and they read their victim impact statements, and he couldn't even look at them. Like, he does not give a fuck, alright? So seeing someone like this nurse who was involved just have such genuine sadness and almost mourning in a way, I could see bring a bit of comfort to some of the family members, and I think that's really nice for them to have included that. Going back to how the documentary was actually like put together, I don't feel like there was an exact like aha moment for when they got him. You know, sometimes they build up and up and up to who it is, and then you're like, oh, I knew it when they finally say it. But they painted this sort of very, very blandly, almost. Like there was no big peak to that moment, and that's not a bad thing. They mentioned him in the beginning, so you're like, okay, this is who we're talking about. And they talk about everything that they're doing and how they're focusing on him, and then they're like, okay, yeah, and then it became obvious. There was no like, this is the moment where we were like, absolutely yes, we're gonna go and nail him sort of thing. I wish there was, but again, that's just bringing a little bit of dramatics to a very true story. So at the same time, it wasn't necessary. Just from my perspective, it would have been nice to have a little bit more of a peek in the content. I did really like that they did not hesitate to highlight the hospital by name, the people working there by name, and how much they fucked up in helping this investigation, starting the investigation late, putting things off, how they looked after themselves. And obviously in those like end cards that I talked about where they put all the writing on the screen, they're like, no, the hospital said, you know, that never happened. And of course they fucking did. They're covering their asses. It happened. And I love that the documentary was just straight up like, the hospital didn't act, and when it did act, it didn't do everything right. It was actively hindering the investigation. There were people there purposefully trying to cover stuff up, because, you know, they can get in a little bit of trouble for doing things like that. And I just love the brutal honesty, because it needed it. They deserved it. The hospital did fuck around. This could have been solved months, even years earlier, if all of the hospitals that this guy worked at actually did their fucking jobs. So I hope that this like documentary is a bit of a wake-up call for things like that, because you will get caught and you will get found out. And I just wish that the people that were involved in these hospitals and the hospitals themselves faced a little bit more backlash and a little bit more punishment for their lack of action. And the only other thing I had was in the end cards, they had quite a bit of information for this one. Usually when they do their like summary, it's usually just like 2 or 3 lines, maybe 2 pages worth. There was probably about 3 or 4 different pages of like small paragraphs of writing, and some of it was really important. I feel like when you get to that point in the documentary, a lot of people are like, okay, well that's all the information, I'm going to turn it off. But some of the stuff that they put in these little end cards was really important, and I wish that they had found a way to include it in the documentary. Like the specific one I'm talking about is they noted that it is suspected that he killed up to 400 people across his career. And that is absolutely wild to me. Like they talked about what he was accused of, what he was sentenced for, and what the sentence was. And I love that most of the time in documentaries they pop those things in, you're just like, oh yeah, what a nice little like tidbit on the end, it's good to know those things. In this case, because what he did was so heinous, I really feel like you could have had just anyone, it could have been like a detective or someone like that, say those things out loud, say that he was punished for this many crimes, this is what the crime was, this is how many years he got. And even though all of those things are what we were able to pin on him, there's a possibility that 400 people were murdered by this man, and that is absolutely disgusting. It very much showed the side of him that's like, oh, woe is me, like I said before, just very like it's gross. And because you're interviewing some of the staff that were friends with him, they don't talk all that badly about him because they didn't know that bad side of him. So they talk about him being wonderful and cheery and having this signature little grin that he does, and you're like, oh, okay, like maybe he is just sick, maybe he just needs like a bit of mental health, and maybe he does, you know what? But I don't think that it's 100% fair to portray him as, oh, I'm just sick and needed help and I didn't get it, because yeah, you were, and you're a nurse and you should have bloody got it. What you are is a murderer. Like the end of this one, and this whole case just makes me really frustrated, and you can tell that the documentary or the docuseries was really good when I start to get passionate about the things I'm talking about, because depending on how you watch this, he did very much paint himself as the victim. And people who knew him definitely kind of helped that a little bit with how they talked about him, when in reality, this man is a fucking murderer and he doesn't deserve, I'm getting a little bit too heated. He doesn't deserve jack shit, okay? That's what I was trying to say. But that's it for this video. Thank you for letting me ramble once again about something that I'm really interested in, even if you're not interested in it. I definitely think you should watch these documentaries, see what you think about them, maybe leave me a comment down below if you have any extra thoughts that I didn't mention, because as always I would love to discuss them with you. I will be doing a few more videos in this series in the coming months, so look out for them. There's also 2 that I have already done, given that this is part 3, so if you haven't seen them, go and watch them. And I will be back next week with another video. I post every week at 8 AM Brisbane, 8 AM? 7 AM. Why do I always do that? It's 7 AM, I promise guys. 7 AM Brisbane time on a Sunday. I will see you there. Thank you all so much for putting up with this hecticness, this video. I'll see you next time. Bye.